Hello everyone.
About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be very happy if you did.
I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Story 1. When the rent crept up again, I knew I needed extra income. My day job barely covered bills and food, so I started looking for anything that paid under the table. A friend of a friend mentioned a warehouse gig that paid in cash and did not ask questions. That was all I needed to hear. I called the number and was told to show up the next morning at 8 a.m. sharp. The place was in an industrial part of town where most buildings looked abandoned or half-used. The warehouse was squat and gray with a sliding metal door and no signs on the outside. Inside it was dusty and dim with only a few lights overhead and crates stacked along the walls. A man in a plain jacket met me at the door and handed me a clipboard. He said I would be assembling packages and that if I worked fast and kept quiet, I would earn more each day. My job seemed simple enough. There were rows of tables where parts came in boxes and had to be arranged into kits, then sealed into plain cardboard packages. I was not told what the parts were or what the packages were for. At first glance, they looked like electronics or machine components. Each box had an instruction sheet with numbers and diagrams, but no brand names or company logos. At first, I was just grateful to have steady work that paid cash at the end of each shift. The others working there did not talk much. Most kept their heads down, focused on speed, and ignored everyone else. A few nodded in greeting, but no one asked names or made small talk. It was a quiet place, with only the sound of tape guns, boxes sliding, and the occasional low hum of machines. After a few days, I started to notice odd details. Some parts felt heavier than they should, and others had sharp edges like metal fins or rods. A few pieces smelled faintly of oil or gunpowder. I told myself it was just my imagination, that they were probably parts for machinery or construction tools. But the more I looked, the more they seemed to resemble something else I did not want to name out loud. One afternoon, I stayed a few minutes after my shift ended. I had dropped my phone under one of the tables and was on my knees looking for it. That was when I saw a box pushed behind a stack, partly open, with foam padding inside. Nestled in the padding were pieces I recognized from war documentaries: metal barrels, handles, and triggers. My breath caught. I grabbed my phone and left without saying a word. That night I could not sleep. I kept going over what I had seen. The parts I had packed were not machine pieces or toolkits. They were weapon components, not replicas, not toys. Real parts meant to be assembled into something that could kill. I lay there in the dark, wondering how deep I was in, and whether walking away would be enough. I told myself I needed more proof before doing anything drastic. So I returned to work the next day, trying to act normal. I paid closer attention to the labels, even though they were coated with numbers and letters that meant nothing to me. I watched how the packages were taped shut, then carried to a separate room in the back. None of us were allowed in that room, but I noticed one of the regular workers slipping in and out with a badge. Every shift made me feel more nervous. I noticed that the workers who packed the fastest were sometimes pulled aside and offered extra hours in the back. One guy who had started the same week as me disappeared after a few days. No one mentioned him again. When I asked quietly where he went, the man next to me shrugged and said people come and go. That was all he said before walking off. I thought about quitting every day, but I needed the money, and more than that, I was scared. What if they found out I knew? What if they watched the cameras and saw me looking too closely? I did not know who ran the place, but I knew it was not just a warehouse job. I started checking over my shoulder when I walked home and avoided talking to anyone about what I did. One evening, as I was leaving the warehouse, I saw a small white van idling outside. The driver glanced at me but did not speak. He looked down at something on his lap, then back at the warehouse. The next day, that same van was parked on the opposite corner. That was when I knew they were watching the place closely, maybe even waiting for a reason to act. The decision weighed on me for another week. I kept telling myself I was just a worker. I had no real knowledge of the operations, no names, no paperwork. But deep down, I knew I was helping assemble something dangerous. I was part of a chain, one link among many, and even if I did not know where the packages went, I was still responsible in some way. The turning point came when one of the workers dropped a small piece and it clattered across the floor. It looked like a bolt or pin, but when I picked it up, I saw it had markings etched into the metal, or military codes. That was it for me. I slipped it into my pocket and kept working until the end of the shift. That night, I walked several blocks to avoid being followed. I found a payphone near a closed gas station and dialed the emergency number. I told them I wanted to report something illegal and dangerous. I did not give my name. I told them the location of the warehouse, what I had seen, and that I had one of the pieces as proof. They asked if I could stay and talk to someone in person. I said no and hung up. For days, I expected a knock on the door or someone to grab me off the street. Nothing happened. I kept working, nervous and on edge, waiting for a sign. Then, one morning, the warehouse was closed. A metal sign had been bolted across the door and yellow tape flapped in the breeze. A few workers stood nearby, confused and whispering. One of them said the police had come early before dawn. I kept walking and never looked back. I threw out the jacket I had worn and deleted the number I had used to get the job. I never saw the people from the warehouse again. I started looking for legitimate work, something slow and honest, even if it paid less. For a long time, I felt like I had gotten away with something or barely escaped. Eventually, the fear faded, replaced by relief. I started to sleep through the night again. I stopped checking behind me when I walked. I still do not know who ran the operation or how deep it went. But I know I did the right thing by stepping away and speaking up, even if I stayed anonymous. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never looked in that box. If I had kept my head down and my mouth shut, I might still be packing those crates, convincing myself it was just a job. But the truth has a way of showing itself when you are not ready. And once you see it, you cannot go back. I did not need to be a hero, but I also did not want to be a silent piece of something cruel. Now I work for a local delivery company. The pay is steady, and I get to talk to people again. Every time I lift a box, I know exactly what is inside. No more secrets, no more shadows, just honest work and the comfort of knowing I chose the right path, even when it was hard. Story 2. Meg. I first saw him in the pale glow of my front window just past 2 in the morning. The street was quiet, the only sound the whisper of wind pushing through the trees. He moved slowly, with care, dragging something heavy wrapped in black plastic. At first I thought it might have been a large bag of yard waste or maybe an old rug, but the way he kept looking over his shoulder made it feel like something was wrong. I stayed low, peeking between the slats of the blind so he would not see me watching. He walked to the edge of his backyard, where the grass met the tree line, and began digging with a spade. The motion was slow, deliberate, and he paused often to wipe sweat from his face. It was not one hole he dug, but 5, each spaced apart evenly like he had planned it. My heart thudded harder with every passing moment. The black bags sat beside him, slumped in a line like sleeping figures. One by one, he lowered them into the holes and packed dirt back over the top. He used his hands to press the soil down, smoothing it out like nothing had ever been disturbed. I felt a sick flutter in my chest, a cold understanding I did not want to face. Something about those bags felt final. I did not sleep after that. I stayed curled in the armchair by the window, watching the spot long after he had gone inside. When the sun rose, it cast a golden light across the trees, but it could not warm the dread I felt. My mind spun with questions I did not want to answer. I told myself there could be a reason, something innocent, but my gut told me otherwise. Later that morning, I heard a knock on my door. When I opened it, he stood there with a forced smile and dark circles under his eyes. He said he had noticed my light on during the night and guessed I might have seen something. I nodded slowly, unsure of what to say. Then he said something that turned my stomach. "Please do not tell anyone about what you saw," he said. His voice was calm, too calm, like he had practiced those words. He said it was nothing illegal, just a personal matter he wanted to keep private. He promised it was not what it looked like and that he appreciated my silence. I could not think of a reply, so I just nodded again. For days after that, I could not shake the feeling of guilt. I avoided the backyard, choosing instead to take long walks or stay inside. Every time I saw him outside, waving at neighbors or watering his flowers, I felt sick. How could someone act so normal after burying 5 bags in the middle of the night? Part of me wanted to believe him, to let it go and pretend none of it had happened. But the image of those bags would not leave my mind. I started to wonder what could have been inside them. I thought of animals, garbage, maybe old furniture or broken things. But why do it at night? And why ask for silence? The questions grew like weeds, tangled and impossible to ignore. One afternoon, I noticed something strange. A patch of the earth where he had dug looked sunken, like the soil had settled more than the rest. It made my skin crawl. I knew I should tell someone, but I kept remembering the way he looked at me. I did not want to cause trouble if I was wrong, but I could not sit still either. I made a decision to visit the library and read through some local records and newspapers. I did not know what I was looking for exactly. Missing persons, odd police reports, anything that might explain what I had seen. There was nothing in the papers, no alerts or warnings. Still, the silence in the headlines made the whole thing feel worse. I went back several times over the next week, digging through archives. Eventually, I found something that gave me pause. A woman had filed a report about a missing pet, not once but twice over the last few months. There were also notices about people hearing strange noises at night coming from that end of the neighborhood. It was not proof, but it stirred something in me. That evening, I walked past his house on my way home, pretending to check my mail, where his lights were on, and I could see the flicker of a television screen through the window. He looked up and waved. I forced a smile and kept walking. As soon as I stepped inside, I locked every door. The next day, I went to a hardware store and bought a small camera. I told myself it was for safety, just in case. I hid it behind a fence post, angled toward the patch of backyard where he had buried the bags. For several nights, nothing happened. Then on the fourth night, just after 1 in the morning, I saw movement on the footage. He was back out there, kneeling by the first spot he had dug. He looked around, then started digging again. My chest tightened as I watched him uncover one of the bags and drag it out. He opened it, and though the video was too dark to see clearly, the shape inside made my mouth go dry. It was long, narrow, and did not move. I copied the footage onto a flash drive and placed it in a drawer, unsure of what to do next. I did not want to go to the police with only that. What if they needed more? What if they did nothing at all? I wrestled with the thought for another day before deciding to go out there myself. Late that night, I crept through the trees with a flashlight, gloves, and a garden trowel. My hands shook with every step, and my breath felt loud in my ears. I reached the first spot, the same one he had opened. The soil was still loose, and it took little effort to dig down. When I reached the plastic, I froze. It smelled like chemicals, sharp and bitter. I cut a small slit in the bag and peeled it open. Inside were torn bits of carpet, stained and damp, and broken wood splinters. Relief washed through me for a moment. Maybe it really was junk, like he had said. But something still felt off. I checked the second spot, then the third. More of the same. Trash, old boards, broken shelves. At the fourth hole, I uncovered something heavier. When I peeled back the plastic, I found dozens of photographs. Each one had been ripped or burned at the corners. Faces stared up at me from the pile, faded but clear. They were all children. My knees buckled, and I dropped the flashlight. I could barely breathe. These were not photos you threw away like broken furniture. These were memories, old and worn, but precious to someone. I gathered a few and sealed the bag again, leaving the others buried. Then I ran back home. That night, I could not sleep. I sat with the photographs spread across my table, studying the faces. Some were smiling, some looked scared. I did not recognize any of them. I decided it was time to speak with someone. Not the police just yet, but someone who could help me understand what this meant. I went to the community center and asked if anyone had worked with missing children records or old case files. A woman there pointed me to a retired teacher who volunteered part-time. I showed him the photographs, and he grew very quiet. He said he recognized one of the children, a student from nearly 20 years ago who had gone missing without explanation. He gave me the contact of a retired detective who had worked on that case. When I called him, he asked to meet in person. I brought everything, the flash drive, the photographs, even the address of my neighbor. He listened carefully, never interrupting. When I finished, he nodded and said he would make a few calls. 3 days later, unmarked vehicles arrived just after dawn. I watched from my window as officers cordoned off the backyard and began digging. My neighbor stood on the porch in handcuffs, his face pale and expressionless. The bags were exhumed one by one, and the contents cataloged. I turned away, no longer needing to see more. The news broke 2 days after. The buried bags had contained no human remains, but they held personal items tied to several cold cases. Boys' photographs, clothing, some with dried stains and marks. Enough to reopen investigations long forgotten. My neighbor had once worked at a foster facility that closed under scandal. As weeks passed, the neighborhood changed. People looked over their shoulders more often. Parents held their children's hands a little tighter, but they also began to talk more, to watch out for one another. I was not shunned for speaking up. In fact, many thanked me. The detective reached out a month later. He said the evidence I had collected helped identify at least 3 children previously lost to time. Their families would now have some closure. He also told me the case was far from over, but that justice had started to move again. I felt a weight lift from my chest. The backyard is empty now. The trees sway the same way they always have, and the grass is beginning to grow again. Sometimes I stand by the window and watch the wind carry away the silence. I do not look at that house with fear anymore. I look at it as proof that the truth, no matter how long buried, always finds its way to the light. Story 3. It started with a late night and a moment of boredom. I had just finished my usual shift and was half awake, scrolling through emails I normally ignored. One subject line stood out from the others. It claimed to be from a job listing I had applied to weeks ago. Bored out of habit and curiosity, I clicked the message without thinking much about it. The email was short and vague. It said there had been an update to my application status and included a link labeled View Interview Schedule. I hesitated for a second, then clicked it. Nothing happened at first. The screen went black for a moment, then flickered before returning to my inbox. I thought it was just a glitch, but something felt off. My laptop fan kicked on even though I had no apps open. I moved the mouse and noticed a small green light glowing just above the screen. That light only came on when my webcam was active. A chill went through me as I realized what was happening. I stared at the screen, unsure of what to do next. Then a window opened in the corner, and I saw myself looking directly into the camera. It was not a recording. It was a live feed. I waved my hand slowly, and the image mimicked me in real time. My stomach dropped. I slammed the laptop shut and backed away. My heart raced, and sweat broke out on my neck. I stood in the center of my room, staring at the closed lid as if it might explode. I felt watched, exposed. Every part of me screamed that something was deeply wrong. But for a few minutes I paced in silence. I thought about unplugging the router, but that felt pointless. If someone already had access to my system, cutting the internet might not stop them. I grabbed my phone and searched for what to do when your webcam is hacked. The results only made me feel worse. They said it was likely my system had been infected with spyware the moment I clicked that link. I remembered the stories people told about hackers blackmailing victims with footage from their own webcams. I tried to think of what I had done that night. Had I said anything private? Had I changed clothes near the laptop? My memory blurred with panic. I just knew I needed to act fast. I powered the laptop back on, keeping the camera covered with a piece of paper. I opened a system scan and tried to install some security software. But the scan froze halfway through. The cursor moved on its own for a second before stopping. Then the screen went black again. This time, when it came back, a message appeared. It was just a line of text in a gray box. It read, "We are watching. Do not call anyone. Do not shut down." I stared at those words, heart pounding, unsure what they meant. I reached for my phone again, but hesitated. I knew I should call someone, report it. But the warning felt real. What if they had control of more than just my camera? What if they had access to my phone too? I turned it off just in case. Then I sat in the corner of my room, far from the laptop, trying to figure out what to do next. The worst part was the not knowing. I did not know who had sent the email, what they wanted, or how long they had been watching. Every time I heard a noise outside or a car pass by, I flinched. I kept imagining someone sitting in a dark room somewhere, watching me through the lens, taking notes on everything I did. Eventually, I remembered an old desktop I had in the closet. It had no webcam and had not been connected to the internet in years. I dragged it out and plugged it in. It was slow and dusty, but it worked. I used it to search for a local computer repair shop, hoping someone there could help. The next morning, I took my laptop in without turning it back on. I explained the situation carefully to the technician, trying not to sound too paranoid. He nodded slowly and said I had done the right thing. He told me it was becoming more common, that even smart people got caught. He kept the laptop and said he would call me in a few days. I walked home feeling exposed and uneasy. I kept the curtains closed and left my phone turned off. I did not go online at all, not even on the old desktop. I did not want to risk anything else being seen. 2 days later, the technician called me. He said the laptop had multiple infections, including remote access software and a keylogger. That meant someone could see everything I typed, watch me through the camera, and possibly copy my files. He said it was a serious breach, but he could clean it and reinstall everything from scratch. I agreed, though I felt sick. He asked if I wanted to report it. I thought about it for a moment, then said yes. He helped me file a report online and said it might be a while before I heard anything. Most of these cases never led to arrests. The people behind them operated across borders and used fake identities. Even so, I felt a little better having taken action. When I got the laptop back, it had a fresh system and new security settings. I bought a physical camera cover and set up alerts for any unusual activity. I changed every password I had and signed up for alerts in case my information was leaked again. Over time, the fear faded. I stopped expecting to see myself on screen every time I opened the laptop. I kept using the camera cover and made it a habit to double-check my system settings each week. I told a few close friends what had happened and warned them never to open strange emails. The experience changed how I viewed the internet. I used to see it as something passive, a tool that worked in the background of my life. Now I knew it could look back at me. I understood that convenience came with risk, and that not every message was what it claimed to be. There were still nights when I remembered that first moment, seeing my own face on the screen, realizing someone had been watching. It felt like a line had been crossed, one that should have been safe. But I also realized that I had taken back control, step by step. It made me more cautious, yes, but it also made me stronger. I learned how to protect myself and how to recognize the signs of danger. I did not let the fear take over. I rebuilt my system, changed my habits, and moved forward. Now I help others understand the risks. I talk to people about what happened and how to stay safe online. I teach them how to use strong passwords, how to spot suspicious links, and why it matters to keep software updated. If my experience can stop someone else from going through the same fear, then it was not wasted. That night taught me something important. No matter how careful you think you are, anyone can make a mistake. What matters is what you do next. I chose to face it, fix it, and make sure it never happened again. That is how I know I came out stronger on the other side. Story 4. He told me he had been through a rough breakup. Said she had hurt him in ways he could not even talk about. There was a bitterness in his voice when he spoke of her, but also something like hesitation. I thought maybe it was just leftover pain, the kind that lingers when someone has been betrayed. I never once imagined he was lying from the very beginning. We met on a quiet evening at a local bookstore. He was charming, soft-spoken, and seemed to really listen when I talked. He wore this expression that made me feel like every word I said mattered. That first night, we walked together under the glow of streetlights, and when we said goodbye, he kissed my cheek like it was the most natural thing in the world. I went home floating, convinced I had finally met someone real. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other almost every day. He always came to my place, saying his apartment was too messy or too far out of town. I never questioned it. He brought takeout, movie suggestions, and stories about his life, always with a slight twist of humor or pain. He was, by all appearances, someone trying to heal and start over. He told me about his ex a few times, each story painting her in a worse light than the last. She was cold, unfaithful, manipulative. The things he said made me angry on his behalf. I wanted to protect him, to give him the kind of love he said he had never had. I believed I was helping him put his life back together. There were little signs I ignored. He never stayed the night, always left by midnight or earlier. He kept his phone face down on the table and flinched when it buzzed. Sometimes, when I asked about his day, he would give vague answers, brushing over details. I convinced myself it was just the wounds of his past, not secrets he was keeping from me. He never introduced me to his friends or family. Said he was keeping things quiet until he felt sure. He did not want to move too fast, he claimed, and I respected that. I had been hurt before too, so I understood the need for caution. Looking back, I see now how much I wanted to believe in him. One evening, after nearly 6 months of dating, I asked him directly why I had never seen his place. He laughed, then grew serious, saying he had something to fix up first. He made it sound like a small mess, just something he was embarrassed to show. I let it go, thinking he would invite me soon. That invitation never came. It was a Saturday when everything began to unravel. He had left a jacket at my place the night before, and when I picked it up to move it, his wallet fell out. I had no intention of snooping, but the picture tucked behind his ID caught my eye. A family photo. A woman, 2 children, and him in the middle, smiling. I stared at it for what felt like hours. My hands shook as I turned it over. On the back, a date and the words "Family Day at the Lake" were written in neat, rounded handwriting. My breath caught in my throat. It was not just an old photo. It looked recent. I waited for him to come over that evening, unsure what I would say. When he walked through the door, smiling like nothing had happened, I felt like I was seeing a stranger. I handed him the photo without a word. His smile dropped and he froze. He did not deny it. He sank into the chair and buried his face in his hands. Then he told me everything. He had never left her. He had a wife and 2 children. The entire relationship with me had been a lie, a distraction, something he claimed he needed to cope with a stressful life. I could barely breathe. Anger burned through me like fire, but beneath it was heartbreak. Everything I thought we had meant nothing. I asked him why he had done it, what he had wanted from me. He had no real answer. Just more apologies and excuses, each one more hollow than the last. I told him to leave and never come back. My hands were still trembling as I shut the door behind him. I locked it, then slid down to the floor and cried until I could not anymore. My apartment, once filled with memories and laughter, now felt cold and false. Even the air felt heavier. In the days that followed, I could not stop thinking about the time I had lost. 6 months of believing in a man who never really existed. I thought of every kiss, every laugh, every moment he had held me and whispered promises he had no intention of keeping. I felt foolish, like I had been sleepwalking through a dream someone else had written. Trust is a fragile thing, and he had shattered it completely. I started avoiding places we used to go. Every corner of the city held some reminder of him. The coffee shop near my work, the park where we had our first kiss, even the bookstore where we met. I kept expecting to see him, to hear his voice, to feel the tug of regret pulling me backward. But I knew I had to move forward. One afternoon, I received a message from an unknown number. It was her, his wife. She said she had found my number on their phone bill and needed to talk. My heart stopped. I hesitated, but then agreed. I needed answers just as much as she did. We met at a small cafe far from our usual haunts. She looked tired, her face pale and lined with stress. She thanked me for meeting her and said she knew I had not been the only one. There had been others. He had been doing this for years, hiding parts of himself from everyone. I sat in stunned silence as she spoke. She told me their marriage had been strained for a long time, but she had never imagined this. He was good at pretending, always had been. They had 2 children, a house, and the life she thought was stable. She found out about me by accident, through a missed call and a name she did not recognize. She said I was the only one who agreed to speak. We sat in silence for a long while. There were no tears, just the heavy weight of shared betrayal. I apologized to her, though I knew I was not to blame. She thanked me for my honesty and said she planned to leave him. For the first time in days, I felt something close to relief. After that meeting, something inside me changed. I no longer felt like a victim of just him, but of a larger lie he had spun around us all. He had hurt not just me, but his own family. I decided I would not let his lies define my future. I deserved more than that. I started therapy, wanting to understand why I had missed the signs. I did not want to carry this pain with me into another relationship. Week by week, I rebuilt the parts of myself he had chipped away. I learned to trust my instincts again, to find strength in my solitude. It was not easy, but it was worth every tear and every sleepless night. I changed my number and blocked him on every platform. I wanted no more surprises, no more connections to the man who had torn my life apart. I reconnected with old friends, took up hobbies I had neglected, and even traveled to a place I had always dreamed of visiting. I let the wind carry away pieces of him that still lingered in my heart. Months passed and the ache began to dull. I smiled more easily, laughed without forcing it. People told me I seemed lighter, freer, and I realized they were right. I was no longer haunted by what had been done to me. I was focused on what came next. And eventually I met someone new. He was kind, respectful, and honest in a way that felt unfamiliar but welcome. I took things slow, letting trust grow naturally. I told him my story when the time was right, and he listened without judgment. That honesty, that patience reminded me what real love should look like. Now, when I think back on those 6 months, I do not feel anger. I feel gratitude for having escaped before it went on any longer. I learned more about myself in the aftermath than I ever had in the middle of it. I found strength I did not know I had. And I promised myself never to settle for half-truths again. His chapter in my life is over. The lessons remain, but the pain no longer holds power. I walk through the city now with new memories, ones I made on my own. The woman I was then would hardly recognize the woman I am now. And that is something I hold close every day. I did not deserve what happened, but I did deserve the life I built after. The lies did not win. I did. Story 5. It started as something small, something forgettable. We had planned to take a short trip out of town for the weekend, just a few hours away from the city. My partner asked me to grab a jacket from the back seat while they ran into a gas station. I reached into the car, pulled the coat forward, and heard something clatter to the floor. At first I thought it was loose change or maybe a keyring. But when I looked down, I saw a phone I had never seen before. It was not their usual phone. That one had a cracked case and a faded sticker on the back. This one was new and clean with no case, no scratches, and no signs of use. I picked it up, curious, thinking maybe it was an old one they forgot to tell me about. I pressed the side button, and the screen lit up instantly. No password, just a home screen with a simple background and a few basic apps. I was not trying to snoop. I only wanted to understand why it was hidden under a seat. I tapped the messages icon and felt my heart drop as I read the first few lines. It was a conversation, dozens of them, and all of them were about me. The messages discussed places, times, phrases like when will they be alone and do not leave a mess. My fingers trembled as I scrolled through message after message that seemed to be planning something horrific. I could not look away. The messages became more detailed, referring to my habits, where I usually parked my car, the time I left for work, and even what I wore most days. I saw photos of me taken from behind from across the street through windows. Some were in our home. I nearly dropped the phone when I saw one that was taken while I slept. My mouth went dry and my pulse pounded in my ears. By the time my partner returned from the gas station, I had already tucked the phone into my own jacket pocket. I forced a smile and acted like nothing had happened. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands clenched tightly in my lap, trying to keep from shaking. They glanced at me and asked if I had found the jacket. I nodded and said yes, but I did not mention what else I had found. The rest of the drive felt endless. I kept glancing out the window, wondering how long this had been going on. I replayed every conversation, every strange moment, every time I had felt watched. I realized I had ignored things that now seemed obvious. The late-night phone calls, the sudden changes in mood, the way they started locking doors that had never been locked before. That night, we checked into a quiet inn on the edge of town. I excused myself to take a walk while they unpacked. Once I was out of sight, I pulled out the hidden phone again. I took photos of every message, every name, every number I could find. I sent them to my own email. I wanted proof. I needed it in case something happened. I thought about calling someone, but I was afraid they might hear. Instead, I walked to a diner down the road and asked to use the phone behind the counter. I dialed the local police station and explained in a low voice that I had found messages about someone planning a disappearance. I did not give names. I just asked if I could speak to someone in person. They told me to come in the next morning. That night I barely slept. I lay still, listening to every sound, wondering if they could tell something had changed. I kept the phone hidden under a floorboard near the bathroom, just in case they searched through my things. In the morning, I pretended I was going for coffee and left with my bag and the phone. I walked for nearly an hour before finding a ride to the station. At the police station, I was taken to a small room with white walls and a table. I handed them the phone and showed them the messages. The officer looked through the contents and his face tightened. He asked me where I had found the phone and who it belonged to. I gave him the information and explained everything that had happened. He said I had done the right thing by coming in. They asked me not to return to the inn. Instead, they arranged for me to stay somewhere safe. I was placed in a small guest room at a local shelter under a different name. I called work and gave them a vague reason for needing a few days off. I checked in with the officer each morning and evening, and they kept me updated on what they were finding. Over the next few days, the investigation deepened. They found out the phone had been purchased anonymously at a convenience store 2 towns over. The number was prepaid and untraceable, but the messages were enough to start a formal case. The person my partner had been messaging turned out to be someone with a criminal background, someone who had vanished from public records a few years earlier. It became clear that the messages were not just a twisted fantasy. Plans had been made, dates had been chosen. A location had even been mentioned, an abandoned cabin not far from where we had planned to hike. The pieces fit together too perfectly. If I had not found the phone when I did, I might not have come back from that trip. Eventually, they brought my partner in for questioning. I was not told the details of what was said, only that the evidence from the phone was enough to justify holding them. I sat in the shelter, staring at the wall, trying to understand how someone I trusted had planned something so evil. I thought back to the beginning, to the quiet dinners and weekend drives, and wondered if any of it had ever been real. The officer told me I might need to testify. I agreed. I wanted to make sure the truth was known. I wanted to look them in the eye and ask why. Why had they done this? Why go through all the motions of love only to plan something so cruel? Weeks passed and the case moved forward. More evidence was found. It turned out I had not been the only one. The person they had contacted had a long list of suspicious messages tied to other cases. But this time, with the phone in hand and a clear paper trail, there was no denying what had been planned. The charges were serious, and the sentence would be long. I moved out of our home and never went back. I changed my number, updated all my passwords, and asked a friend to help me find a new place. I started over, carefully and slowly, rebuilding my life from the ground up. For a long time, I jumped at every sound, kept a light on at night, and locked every door twice. But little by little, I began to breathe again. Some nights the fear still returns. I think about how close I came to disappearing without a trace. But then I remember the moment I chose to act. I did not stay silent. I did not ignore the signs. I found the courage to protect myself, even when it meant facing the worst truth of all. In time, I found peace. Not because I forgot what happened, but because I refused to let it define me. I kept moving forward, step by step, and learned to trust my instincts. I surrounded myself with people who were genuine, kind, and honest. I built a new life, safer and stronger than the one before. Now, when I look back on it, I do not see weakness or fear. I see strength. I see survival. I see a person who faced the unimaginable and made it through. And that, above all else, is something no one can ever take from me. Story 6. It started when the wind knocked a section of my fence down during a late spring storm. I had put off repairs for too long, always saying I would get to it next week. Eventually, I hired a man recommended by someone at the hardware store. He showed up the following morning with a toolbox and a firm handshake. At first glance, he seemed quiet, capable, and polite enough. He worked mostly in silence, focused and efficient, rarely making small talk. I brought him water once or twice, and he would nod without really looking at me. Something about the way he kept his eyes on the ground made him feel distant, but I assumed it was just a working habit. He finished the job in 2 days, said he would swing back once more to double-check everything. I paid him in cash and thanked him for his time. That night, I thought I saw someone in the yard. It was close to midnight, and I had gone into the kitchen for a glass of water. A shadow moved past the window quickly, too quick to be clear. I brushed it off as a cat or the wind playing tricks with the trees. Still, I locked the back door and checked each window before returning to bed. The next night, the shadow came back. This time I saw it more clearly, standing just past the broken fence section that had been repaired. It was the same man I had hired, but he was shirtless, barefoot, and just standing there, facing my window. I ducked down behind the curtain, heart hammering, unsure of what I had just seen. I waited for minutes that felt like hours, but when I looked again, he was gone. I did not sleep well after that. Every sound felt too loud, every creak too sharp. I tried to rationalize it, thinking maybe he had left something behind and came back to retrieve it. But why at night, and why without a shirt? The questions made my skin crawl. I promised myself I would be more vigilant. The following evening, I turned off all the lights in the living room and sat in the dark, watching the window. Just after 1 in the morning, he appeared again. He stood at the edge of the lawn, shirtless, arms hanging at his sides, staring directly at the house. He did not move. He did not speak. I reached for my phone, but could not bring myself to call anyone. I watched him for several minutes until he turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees behind the property. My heart would not stop racing. I stayed on the couch the rest of the night, too shaken to go upstairs. By morning it felt like a dream, but I knew it had been real. I could still feel the panic in my chest. The next day I went outside and checked the backyard. There were faint footprints in the soft dirt by the fence. No tools, no reason for him to return. I felt cold despite the warm air. I knew something was not right. I decided to install cameras. I did not tell anyone what I had seen, afraid it would sound ridiculous. A man watching my window at night, like some ghost from a nightmare. Still, I needed proof. I bought a set of motion-activated cameras and installed them on the front and back of the house. That night, I waited again. This time, I kept the lights on, tried to act normal. I made tea, read a book, all while my heart ticked like a clock. Just before 2 in the morning, the back camera sent an alert. I opened the feed on my phone and froze. There he was again, shirtless, standing motionless at the edge of the yard. He did not move even when the motion light turned on. He just stood there, eyes fixed on the back window. My breath caught in my throat. I took a screenshot and saved the clip. The next morning, I took the footage to the local authorities. I expected them to tell me to come back if something more serious happened. But to my surprise, the officer took it seriously. He asked if I had hired anyone recently, and I gave him the man's name and phone number. He promised they would look into it. That night, There was no visit, nor the night after. I started to relax, thinking maybe it had been enough to scare him off. I even slept a full night for the first time in over a week. Still, I kept checking the footage every morning, just in case. On the fourth night, the alert came again. This time he was closer, much closer. He had moved from the edge of the yard to the back porch. He stood just inches from the door, looking through the glass. I saw his face clearly. No expression. No, just blank, cold eyes staring straight inside. I called the authorities again. This time they sent someone out. The officer walked the property with me, checking every window and door. He found more footprints in the dirt, leading from the trees to the porch. He told me to keep the cameras running and not to engage if I saw him again. They promised patrols in the area, but I still felt exposed. I started sleeping with a flashlight and a kitchen knife by my bed. Every creak made me sit upright. Every gust of wind made my heart stop. I stopped going outside after dark, kept the curtains drawn, and left lights on through the night. I was not living. I was surviving. One evening, I got a call from the officer handling my report. He told me they had tried to reach the man, but his listed address was a false one. No official record, no proper license, just a name and number that led nowhere. My blood ran cold. I had let this person into my home. I had paid him. I had trusted him. That night, I did not sleep at all. I stayed by the window, phone in hand, heart pounding. Just after 3 in the morning, the alert came again. This time, he did not just stand on the porch. He reached for the door handle. I called 911, whispering as I gave my address. He jiggled the handle, then stepped back, staring again through the glass. The lights from the approaching patrol car lit up the yard. He turned and ran before they arrived. The officer chased after him but lost him in the woods. They searched for hours but found no trace. I gave them the footage again, this time showing him at the door. They told me to pack a bag and stay somewhere else for a few nights. I stayed with a friend across town, barely speaking, barely sleeping. The next morning, a detective called. They had matched the man's face with an open case in another county. He had done similar things before. He was not just a drifter or a strange man from the hardware store. He had a record. Natty record. With that information, they put out a formal alert and increased patrols. They promised to find him, to bring him in. I returned home 2 days later, nervous but determined not to let fear take everything from me. I changed the locks, installed more cameras, and added extra lighting around the yard. Weeks passed with no sign of him. Then one afternoon I got the call. They had found him 3 towns over, hiding in an abandoned property. He had a journal full of names and addresses. Mine was on the list. They arrested him without incident, and he was held without bail. I cried for the first time in days. The detective later told me that if I had not reported him, it could have ended much worse. He said the journal held details about my house, my schedule, even what time I turned off the lights. It made me sick to think how close I had come to something terrible. But it was over. Finally, it was over. I started to breathe again. Slowly, day by day, I reclaimed my space. I painted the back porch, rearranged the furniture, planted flowers by the fence. I was not the same person I had been before, but I was stronger. I had faced something dark and walked out of it with my life. I joined a local neighborhood watch and started sharing my story. Well, not to scare people, but to remind them to trust their instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I encouraged others to use cameras, stay connected, and look out for one another. Fear does not win when we stand together. Now, when I sit in my living room at night, I no longer feel like I am being watched. The shadows outside are just trees. The wind is just wind. My home is mine again. And I will never let anyone take that from me. Story 7. I was only planning to stop for a few minutes. It was late, just past 10 p.m., and I needed gas before heading home. The station was mostly empty, with only one other car parked near the far pump. The lights overhead buzzed softly, casting a pale glow across the concrete. I got out, swiped my card, and began fueling up without giving it much thought. The night was cool, quiet except for the hum of traffic in the distance. I leaned against the car and stared at nothing in particular. That was when I noticed the man walking toward me. He looked ordinary, maybe a little tired, dressed in jeans and a gray jacket. I assumed he was going to ask for directions or spare change. He stopped beside me without saying anything at first. I turned to ask if he needed help, but before I could speak, he leaned in close. I could feel his breath near my ear as he whispered something that made my blood run cold. It was my home address, word for word, street, number, and even the color of my door. I froze. My heart skipped a beat as I tried to understand what I had just heard. I pulled away, staring at him with wide eyes, but he was already turning and walking back toward the shadows behind the station. I called out, asking who he was and how he knew where I lived. He did not respond. He disappeared around the corner and never looked back. I stood there, my hand still on the gas nozzle, too stunned to move. Toward my address. That was not something a stranger should know. I yanked the nozzle free, replaced it in the pump, and got in my car with shaking hands. I locked the doors and drove off as fast as I could. Every time I checked the rearview mirror, I expected to see him following me. By the time I reached home, my mind was racing. I circled the block twice before pulling into the driveway, checking to see if anyone was behind me. The street was quiet, no sign of anyone. Still, I hesitated before going inside. I walked through each room, checking the locks on the doors and windows. Everything seemed untouched, but I could not shake the feeling that someone had been there. I barely slept that night. Every creak in the house made me sit up and listen. I kept the lights on, my phone close, and a flashlight by my side. I considered calling the police, but I kept thinking about how strange it would sound. A man whispered my address to me. That was it. No threat, no name, just a sentence that felt like a warning. The next morning I tried to go about my day like normal, but I could not focus on anything. At work, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see that same gray jacket in the hallway. I told myself maybe it was a coincidence, some kind of mistake. Maybe he had confused me with someone else. But deep down, I knew better. I started locking my doors during the day, even when I was home. I added a chain to the front door and placed a wooden bar in the sliding back door. I installed a small camera above the porch, just in case. I tried to regain some sense of control. But even with all those precautions, the feeling never left. I felt watched. One evening, about a week after the gas station incident, I found a note in my mailbox. It was folded in half, no envelope, just a single line written in block letters. It read, "Still watching." My hands trembled as I held the paper. I looked up and down the street. No one was there. I walked the perimeter of the yard and checked the windows again. This time I did call the police. An officer came by, took the note, and asked me a series of questions. I explained what had happened at the gas station and about the note. He nodded and wrote everything down, though I could tell he was trying not to show doubt. He said they would increase patrols in the area and advised me to stay alert. That was it. Mom. After he left, I sat on the couch and stared at the front door for a long time. I started sleeping in short bursts, always waking up to check the cameras. One night, I saw movement in the front yard around 3 a.m. A figure moved past the edge of the camera's view, barely visible, but unmistakably there. I saved the footage and called it in. The officer returned, reviewed the clip, and promised to send someone to canvass the neighborhood. Things grew quieter for a while after that. Weeks passed with no notes, no late-night visitors, no whispered threats. I tried to breathe again. I joined a self-defense class at the local gym and started walking with a small group in the evenings. I got a dog, a big one, the kind that barked at every noise and made me feel just a little bit safer. One afternoon, I got a call from the police station. They asked if I could come in to identify someone. My heart skipped a beat. I drove down immediately and was taken to a small room with a window. Behind it stood the man from the gas station. He looked the same jacket, same expressionless face. They said he had been picked up a few towns over, acting suspicious around another gas station. When asked how he had known my address, he said nothing. No explanation, no apology, just silence. They found a notebook in his backpack with addresses, phone numbers, and photos. Mine was near the top of the list. It turned out I was not the only one he had followed. Several others had reported similar encounters, but I had been the only one with enough evidence to identify him. Eventually, he was charged with stalking and harassment. He was held in custody pending further investigation. I was told I might be contacted again if the case moved forward. I nodded and left the station with a mixture of relief and lingering tension. Part of me still felt like looking over my shoulder, but another part knew it was finally over. With time, I returned to a more normal routine. The camera stayed up, the locks remained in place, and I continued my self-defense training. I kept the dog, who had become more than just protection. He was my companion, my constant reminder that I was never truly alone. I told a few close friends what had happened, and they helped me rebuild my sense of safety. That experience taught me to listen to my instincts, learning to trust the part of me that sensed danger, even when it seemed irrational. It reminded me how vulnerable we all are, and how quickly life can shift from ordinary to terrifying. But it also showed me how resilient I could be, how strong. I still stop for gas. I still go out at night. But I am different now. Not afraid, but aware. Cautious, but not frozen. I survived something that could have ended badly, and instead of breaking me, it made me more alert, more prepared. That stranger tried to make me feel powerless, but in the end, I reclaimed my voice, my space, my peace. And now, I live my life without fear because I know what it feels like to be hunted and to win. Story 8. I was driving through a quiet stretch of highway, nothing but trees and open land on either side. The road felt endless, winding through parts of the state I had never seen before. I was heading toward a town I barely remembered, hoping to find work or at least a place to rest for the night. My gas tank was low, my phone was nearly dead, and the last sign of civilization had been miles behind me. When I saw the glowing lights of a gas station up ahead, I felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The place looked abandoned at first glance, but the flickering open sign in the window gave it away. There was one other car parked beside the building, engine off, no one inside. I pulled up to the pump, filled the tank quickly, then stepped inside to pay. The clerk barely looked up, muttered the total, and went back to staring at the small television behind the counter. I asked if there was a restroom, and he jerked his thumb toward the back hallway without a word. The hallway smelled like bleach and mildew, with peeling paint and a flickering overhead bulb. I pushed open the door to the restroom and immediately noticed something pinned to the wall above the sink. A sheet of paper, old and curled at the edges, protected by a layer of plastic. The heading said "Missing" in bold black letters. My legs locked when I saw the photo beneath it. It was me. The picture was a little older, maybe a year or two, but unmistakable. My face, my eyes, even the small scar near my eyebrow. The name below the image was mine. The details said I had vanished without a trace months ago, last seen wearing a jacket I still had folded in my car. I stood there, staring, unable to breathe, my thoughts tangled and loud. I reached out to touch the paper, almost hoping it would disappear under my fingers. It did not. The photo was real. The poster was real. I glanced around the restroom, half expecting someone to jump out. I checked the stalls, checked the door, my heart racing. No one was there. I splashed water on my face and stared into the mirror. My reflection looked pale, eyes wide and unblinking. What did this mean? Who had made that poster? I had no memory of ever being missing. I had been traveling, yes, and drifting from place to place, but never lost. Not like that. I stepped back into the gas station and looked toward the clerk. He was still watching his screen, eyes glazed, chewing something slowly. I opened my mouth to ask about the poster, then closed it again. What if he already knew? What if he had put it there? The fear settled deeper into my chest. I walked out and sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel. I thought about calling someone, but who would I even call? I had not spoken to family in years, had no close friends left. My phone buzzed once, then went dark. Battery dead. I sat in silence, trying to remember where I had been in the last 6 months. I could recall faces, places, moments, but not in order, like scattered puzzle pieces that refused to fit. I remembered working in a diner in another town, then sleeping in my car near a river, then helping someone move furniture in exchange for cash. But there were gaps, long blank stretches of time I could not explain. I drove away from the gas station with the image burned into my mind. Every mile between me and that restroom felt like distance from something dangerous. Still, questions haunted me. Had someone reported me missing without my knowing? Or had something happened to me that I had blocked out? I needed answers. The next town was small, barely more than a few buildings gathered around a courthouse. I found a public library with internet access and looked up the name from the poster. My name. There it was, listed on several databases. She reported missing 6 months ago. No updates. No leads. Just vanished. My hands trembled as I read the articles. A few of them described me as troubled, quiet, likely to run away. Others hinted at possible foul play. One had an interview with a woman who claimed to be my aunt, crying and pleading for information. I recognized her face. She had raised me after my parents passed. I printed one of the articles and folded it into my pocket. The librarian gave me a curious look as I left, but said nothing. I wandered around the town for hours, trying to place myself in time, trying to remember something that would explain everything. But there was nothing. Just a growing sense of confusion and dread. That night I checked into a small motel off the highway. The room was musty but clean enough. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat on the bed staring at the printed article. My face looked so strange under the headline, like a stranger wearing my features. I stayed awake most of the night, listening to the creaks of the building and the hum of the air conditioner. The next morning I decided to visit the local authorities. I walked into the small station and asked to speak with someone about a missing person case. When they asked who, I told them it was me. The woman at the desk frowned, asked me to repeat myself, then called someone from the back. A man in uniform came out, asked me to sit down. He asked questions gently at first. Where had I been? Who had I seen? What did I remember? I answered as best I could, explaining the gas station, the poster, and my confusion. He took notes, nodded slowly, then left the room for a long time. When he returned, his face was different. Serious. Concerned. He told me my disappearance had been reported by family, that no one had heard from me since the winter, that I had left behind belongings, a half-packed bag, a letter that did not make much sense. He said there had been an investigation, though it never led anywhere. I asked to see the letter. He said it was filed at another location, but he could request a copy. I stayed in town while they processed everything. The officer arranged a meeting with a counselor, someone trained in memory trauma. We talked for hours. She believed I might have experienced dissociative fugue, a rare condition triggered by extreme stress. It made sense in a strange way. The missing time, the fragments of memory, the travel without direction. Over the next few days, things began to settle. The authorities confirmed my identity. I spoke with the woman who had reported me missing. Her voice cracked when she heard mine. She said she had feared the worst. I agreed to visit her soon, to piece things together at a pace I could handle. The gas station poster was taken down. They traced it to someone who had passed through the area and claimed to recognize me. It was unclear how that person knew me or why they had made the effort, but it no longer mattered. What mattered was that I was found, even if I had never truly known I was lost. I spent the next few weeks in a quiet place outside the town, surrounded by trees and silence. I wrote down everything I could remember, even the strange dreams that came at night. Each day brought back a little more. Sometimes painful things, sometimes comforting ones. I let them come, one memory at a time. Eventually, I returned to the town where the poster had been. The gas station looked the same dull lights, the same empty road. I stood outside for a moment, then turned away. I did not need to go inside again. What I had found was not in that restroom. It was inside me, waiting to be remembered. Now, I live with more awareness. I pay attention to my thoughts, my patterns, the weight I carry. I do not have every answer, but I have enough. I speak with the counselor weekly, check in with the woman who raised me, and keep a journal to track my days. I am not drifting anymore. I am not missing. Not from the world, not from myself. I have been given a second chance to return to my life, and I do not intend to waste it. Whatever had pushed me away from it before no longer controls me. I walk forward now, not searching, but building. Story 9. It began as a joke, or at least I thought it was. We were in the break room, sipping burnt coffee and avoiding emails when my coworker leaned over and made an offhand comment. Something about how easy it would be to rob the office if someone really wanted to. I laughed, brushing it off, assuming it was just another attempt at dry humor during a long shift. He kept going though, pointing out where the cameras were and which drawers had the cash. At first I did not think much of it. Well, we all said stupid things sometimes, especially when we were bored. But something in his voice made me uneasy. He was too specific, too confident, like he had thought it through more than he should have. I made a sarcastic remark, trying to end the conversation, and he smirked as if he knew something I did not. I carried that discomfort with me for the rest of the day. Every time I walked past him, I wondered if I was overthinking. Maybe it really had been just a joke, but something about it would not leave me alone. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I still started paying closer attention to him. Over the next week, I noticed he stayed late more often. Not just a few minutes past closing, but long after everyone else had gone. I once came back for my phone and found him alone in the back office, scribbling something quickly and shutting his notebook when he saw me. He smiled and made a joke, but I could not shake the feeling that I had interrupted something important. He always had a reason, some excuse about paperwork or extra tasks. One afternoon, he stepped out for lunch and left his desk drawer open. I happened to walk by and noticed a rolled-up piece of paper sticking out. Curiosity tugged at me, though I hesitated. I told myself not to invade his privacy, but the memory of his strange behavior pulled harder. I glanced around, then gently opened the drawer wider. What I saw turned my stomach. There were several sheets of graph paper, neatly drawn blueprints of our office. Each room was labeled, with details about the security system's exits and even shift schedules. Certain routes were marked in red, suggesting movement or timing. I recognized my own initials near the front entrance and realized he had tracked everyone's habits. I quickly closed the drawer and stepped away. My hands were shaking. My first thought was to report it, but then I wondered if anyone would believe me. What if they thought I was just trying to start trouble? I knew I needed to be careful. I took a breath, returned to my desk, and spent the rest of the day pretending nothing had happened. That night, I could not sleep. I kept thinking about those red lines on the blueprints, or the precision of the drawings. The fact that my coworker had joked about robbing the place just days before. I knew it was not a coincidence. I considered calling the police, but I did not want to escalate too fast. Instead, I decided to collect proof. Over the next few days, I watched him closely. He carried that notebook everywhere. He kept checking the security monitors a little too often, even when nothing was happening. He asked questions about shift changes and which keys opened which doors. I started writing everything down, logging times and details in a private file on my phone. One evening I stayed behind, pretending to finish some tasks. I waited until he left, then returned to his desk. This time I brought my phone and took photos of the blueprints. I also found a second set of notes hidden behind a folder. They included a list of codes, safe combinations, and even a date written in bold letters. It was less than a week away. Now I had enough. I made copies and sent them to myself, along with a note explaining what I had found. The next morning, I approached our supervisor and asked for a private meeting. I showed them the photos and shared everything I had observed. At first they looked skeptical, but as I kept talking, their expression changed. They asked me to stay quiet while they investigated. Of course, things moved quickly after that. Security was alerted. An internal audit was launched. My coworker was called into a meeting and never came back. Rumors spread, but no one knew the full story. I was told to keep it confidential while the authorities reviewed the evidence. Later that week, the police arrived. They confirmed that the blueprints matched a robbery plan found in another investigation. My coworker had ties to a group suspected of staging thefts using inside information. He had been gathering data for weeks, waiting for the right moment. If I had not said something, the robbery would have happened the following Friday. They thanked me for speaking up. I was offered time off and support if I needed it. I declined the break, choosing to stay and help with the transition. We all felt shaken, unsure how close we had come to danger. But we also felt a strange sense of unity. We had caught something before it spiraled out of control. Eventually, things returned to normal. A few new policies were put in place and security was tightened. The locks were changed. Access to certain areas became more restricted. Everyone was more alert, more careful. We had all learned that even the people we work beside every day can be hiding things. For me, the experience changed how I view trust. I still believe in giving people the benefit of the doubt, but I also listen to my instincts. That strange feeling I had when he joked about the robbery was real. It had been a warning I almost ignored. Now I pay attention. Looking back, I do not feel proud in the traditional sense. I feel responsible. I feel relieved. I acted when it counted, even though I was scared of what might happen. That moment at the desk, when I chose to open the drawer, became a turning point. I learned that doing the right thing is not always clear or easy. Sometimes it means stepping into uncomfortable territory. Sometimes it means risking judgment or disbelief. But in the end, it means preventing something much worse. And I am glad I made that choice. Life has gone on. The office feels safer now, though quieter. People still make jokes, still grumble over the coffee, but there is an unspoken awareness behind our routines. We know what nearly happened. We know who stopped it. And I carry that knowledge with me, not as a burden, but as a reminder. A reminder that listening, observing, and speaking up can change everything. A reminder that one small decision can protect many lives. A reminder that even in the most familiar places, you should never ignore what feels wrong. Because sometimes doing the right thing starts with a single question you dare to ask yourself: what if this is not a joke? Story 10. When I opened my eyes, the morning light was already creeping through the curtains. My mouth was dry, my head pounding as though I had been drinking, though I remembered nothing of the sort. I tried to sit up, only to find my wrists caught. I looked down and saw a cold metal circling both arms, tightly fastened to the frame of my bed. Panic rose so quickly that it took my breath away. I pulled hard, twisting, thinking maybe it was some sort of joke or dream. The cuffs were real. Heavy and snug, they clanked against the wooden frame with each tug. I froze then, breathing hard, heart drumming like a warning bell. I looked around the room, half expecting someone to be standing in the shadows. No one was there. Everything looked exactly as I had left it the night before. My phone sat on the nightstand just inches from my fingers, too far to reach. The clock read a little after 7 a.m. I lay still for a moment, trying to think. I lived alone. My apartment was small, and I always locked the door before bed. There was no sign of a break-in, no mess, no sign of struggle. My clothes were still on. My memory ended at brushing my teeth and turning out the light. I screamed at first, loud, angry, desperate. No one came. My walls were thick, my neighbors distant. The windows were closed, the curtains drawn. My voice echoed back at me, thin and useless. I was alone, and the cuffs were not coming off on their own. I forced myself to stop panicking. Whoever had done this had left. Or maybe never stayed. I tested the strength of the bed frame, trying to see if I could break it. Forward, solid wood, no luck. I kicked off the blanket and twisted my arms, looking for angles, for weaknesses in the chain. An hour passed, then another. Sweat beaded on my neck and forehead. I was thirsty, hungry, and more frightened than I had ever been. I started to think about what kind of person would do this. Not a thief. Not a thief. Nothing was missing. Not a prankster. I had no friends who would go that far. Then I remembered the door. If I could get free, I could check the front door, check the locks. But I already knew. I had a deadbolt that clicked loudly when turned. I would have heard it in my sleep. I always engaged the chain too, which had to be done from the inside. Whoever had been in my home never left. That thought made the room colder. I shifted on the mattress, trying again to reach the phone. My fingers stretched, strained. It tipped slightly, slid an inch closer. I held my breath and reached again. Another nudge. It took half an hour, but I finally knocked it off the table. It hit the floor, screen up, just barely within reach. I dialed with the side of my hand, thumb awkwardly swiping until I got the emergency number entered. Look, I shouted into the speaker, hoping someone would hear. But all minutes passed. A voice came through, calm and steady. I told them my name, my address, and what had happened. They promised help was on the way. The sound of sirens never brought such relief before. When the officers arrived, they had to break the bedroom door open. It had been locked from the inside, something I never did. They stood over me, confusion on their faces. One of them examined the cuffs while the other asked questions. I answered as best I could, though my voice shook. They uncuffed me and helped me sit up. My wrists were raw and bruised. I asked them to check the apartment. They found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no fingerprints, no tools left behind. The windows were all locked. The chain on the front door was still in place. The officers looked at me differently after that, like maybe I had done this to myself. One of them even asked gently if I had taken anything the night before. I shook my head, ashamed at how little I could prove. They filed a report and left me standing in my own living room, feeling like a stranger in my own space. I tried to move on. I cleaned the bedroom, stripped the sheets, threw the cuffs into a locked drawer. I tried to sleep that night, but every creak made me sit up in the dark. I left the lights on. I checked the locks every 10 minutes. I stopped trusting the silence. Over the next few days, nothing happened. I went back to work. I told no one. I convinced myself it had been a one-time event, a strange break from reality, maybe even a forgotten dream laced with something I had eaten. But deep down, I knew better. Something had happened. Someone had been in that room. A week later, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was just one sentence, printed neatly on a scrap of lined paper. "You sleep very deeply." I dropped it and backed away as if it might burn me. I had not been in the kitchen since morning. The door had remained locked. No windows were broken. Nothing else had been touched. I went back to the authorities, this time with the note in hand. They took it seriously, ran it for prints. There were none. They advised me to install cameras, change the locks, and stay with someone if possible. I did all of that. I bought new deadbolts, new chains, even a camera that recorded every corner of the apartment. Still, the fear grew. I watched footage obsessively, sometimes staying up all night to scan every hour. I checked every second of every clip. Nothing showed up. No one entered. No one left. The hallway remained empty. The front door never opened. And yet, things continued to happen. One morning I woke up to find the drawers in my kitchen wide open. The contents neatly arranged on the counters. Nothing missing, just moved. One night I found my bathroom light on, though I had not used it. The towel had been used, damp and folded on the sink. Another note appeared in my sock drawer. It simply said, "I like watching you." I stopped sleeping. I stopped eating. My hands shook all the time. I kept the television on at all hours to drown out the silence. I felt the air grow heavier each day. The walls closed in around me. Then I saw him. It was around 3 in the morning. I had just gotten out of bed to grab water. I passed the hallway mirror and saw him standing behind me. Not in the room, but in the reflection. A man, tall, wearing dark clothes. No expression, just watching. When I turned around, the hallway was empty. I nearly collapsed. I called for help again, and again they found nothing. No one hiding, no prints, no evidence. But this time they believed I was not imagining it. The look on my face must have told them enough. They assigned a plainclothes patrol to check the area every night. Still, the feeling never left me. Then came the final night. I woke up again, hands free this time, but the door to my bedroom stood wide open. A chair had been pulled into the center of the room. On it sat a tape recorder. A real one, the kind with physical buttons and a small red light. I hesitated, then pressed play. The voice was mine. It was me, talking calmly, slowly, describing everything. Describing the night I locked myself in. Describing the sound of the cuffs clicking shut. Describing the notes I wrote to myself. I stared at the recorder, bile rising in my throat. The voice ended with a sentence that broke me. I wanted to feel fear again. I dropped the recorder and sat down on the floor. For a long time, I could not move. The truth unraveled slowly, painfully. I had done all of it. The handcuffs, the notes, the open drawers, the towels, the mirror. All of it staged. Part of me knew, but had buried it deep. But it was not madness. Not completely. The counselor I later spoke with helped me understand. I had dissociated, detached from myself so deeply that I had created the fear I thought I was escaping. I needed control, even if it came through terror. But now I had the truth. I was not being haunted. I was healing. Recovery took time. I moved out of that apartment. I started seeing the counselor weekly. I began journaling, rebuilding a connection with myself I had not known I had lost. I forgave the fear, slowly. I understood that it came from something long buried, and that I had survived it. Now when I sleep, I leave the bedroom door open by choice. And when I wake up, I do so with calm. I still check the locks. I still pause before entering a dark room. But I know the person behind the fear now. And I trust them. Because they are me. And I am no longer afraid. Story 11. It was early in the morning when I first saw it. I had stepped out to take the trash down to the street, still half asleep and barely thinking. The sky was a dull gray, that kind of color the world takes on before sunrise, and the air was unusually still. That was when I noticed the van parked directly in front of my apartment building. It was large, boxy, and white, with a faded logo painted on the side in block letters. Mobile Cremation Services. The words stopped me cold. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of it. I had never heard of such a thing. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, the kind of place where the loudest sound most nights was the creak of tree branches. A van like that did not belong on our street. There were no hospitals nearby, no funeral homes. No reason for it to be here. Curiosity tugged at me, but caution kept me still. I watched it for a while, expecting someone to get out, expecting movement of any kind. But the windows were dark, and the vehicle just sat there in silence. Eventually I turned and went back inside, telling myself it would be gone by the time I returned from work. It was probably some mistake, I reasoned. A strange, unfortunate parking job. But when I came back later that afternoon, it was still there, or in the exact same spot. No ticket on the windshield. No sign it had moved. It looked like it had not been touched at all. That was when I started to feel something deeper than unease. A slow kind of dread, the kind that settles low in your stomach and refuses to leave. I asked around, but no one else seemed to know anything about it. My neighbors shrugged. Maybe a prank. Maybe a real company. Maybe someone using it to store tools. The explanations came quickly, but they were hollow. None of them matched the feeling I got when I looked at that van. That feeling that something was very wrong. By the third day, I could not ignore it anymore. The van had not moved an inch. I began checking on it before and after work, walking past slowly, looking for details. There was no license plate, no company phone number. Just those 3 words cracked and faded across the side. The back doors were locked with a heavy latch. I listened closely but never heard a sound. I started dreaming about it. Dreams where I stood in front of the van as it opened slowly on its own. Dreams where smoke drifted out and something unseen stepped toward me. I woke up each time drenched in sweat, convinced that something was watching me. I began drawing my blinds. I avoided the front windows. The street no longer felt safe. One night, unable to sleep, I stepped outside to smoke and clear my head. The van loomed at the curb, a silent figure under the street lamp. But this time I noticed something different. There was a smear of dark residue on the pavement just beneath the rear doors, a stain that had not been there before. I stepped closer and crouched down. The smell hit me immediately. Acrid, bitter, chemical, but it was not oil. It was something else. I stood there in the stillness, the hair rising on the back of my neck. I looked up and down the street. Every house was dark. I was alone. I took out my phone and snapped a few photos. I figured if something was going on, I should have proof. I tried calling a non-emergency line, but no one seemed to take it seriously. They logged my report and told me someone would look into it. Days passed. Nothing changed. The stain grew darker. Flies began to gather near the rear bumper. My unease turned to obsession. I began researching mobile cremation services. There were none in my city, not legitimate ones. I looked into permits, local ordinances, health regulations. Nothing matched. I started checking the news, looking for missing persons or strange deaths. That was when I found a post on a local message board. Someone across town had seen a similar van parked near their apartment complex. It had stayed for days, then vanished overnight. A week later, a body was found in a wooded area 2 blocks away. The post had no follow-up. The original poster never replied again. I took the day off work and watched the van from my upstairs window. Hour after hour. No movement. No driver. No visitors. But sometime around 3 p.m. I noticed the latch on the back had shifted. It was slightly loose. Almost as if someone had tampered with it or tried to open it. My heart began to race. I knew I had to see inside. At midnight, I slipped outside with a flashlight. I wore gloves, telling myself I would only check the doors. Just to look. Just to confirm what I already feared. The latch was stiff, but it moved when I forced it. I gripped the handle, took a breath, and pulled. The smell hit me like a wall. The inside of the van was lined with sheet metal. In the center, a large steel box sat bolted to the floor. It looked like an industrial oven. The kind you might find in a morgue or crematorium. The walls were covered in scorch marks. Ash coated the floor. And in one corner, I saw a torn piece of clothing. But it was melted and stained. I stumbled back and vomited onto the street. I slammed the doors shut, resecured the latch, and ran back inside. I washed my hands 3 times. I called the police again and this time demanded they come. When they finally arrived, I showed them the van, the photos, the stain. I told them everything. They were silent as they looked inside, One officer immediately stepped away and called for backup. The van was impounded. A forensics team arrived that night. They cordoned off the street and questioned every resident. I gave a full statement, showed them my notes and the screenshots from the message board. By morning, the van was gone. The officers thanked me, told me I had done the right thing, and left me standing in the silence of dawn. Days passed, then a week. A detective returned to speak with me. The van had been registered under a fake business name. No physical address, no records. The equipment inside was modified, illegal, and untraceable. They believed it had been used to dispose of bodies, possibly tied to a string of disappearances across the city. Mine was the first report that had led to physical evidence. I asked if they knew who was responsible. They said not yet, but the investigation was growing. I might be called again. Until then, I should stay aware. I nodded, though sleep still evaded me. The dreams continued, quieter now, but always circling back to the van. Months went by. The story never made the news. I kept checking, searching for updates. But it all remained quiet, as if nothing had happened, as if the city wanted to forget. But I did not forget. I still walk past that spot on the curb every morning. The pavement is clean now, no stain, no trace. But I remember. I remember the silence, the smell, the metal box and the burned cloth. I remember how close that van had been to my front door. I still lock it twice each night and listen for engines in the dark. But I also remember the moment I chose to act. The decision to look, to open, to tell. That moment saved lives. It reminded me that evil is often quiet. It hides in plain sight. It waits in stillness. But it can be seen, and it can be stopped. So I watch now, not with fear, but with purpose. Because I know what others choose to ignore. I know what waits when no one is looking. And I will never look away again. Story 12. I found the package on the front step just after breakfast. The box was ordinary, taped shut neatly with no markings except for the shipping label. I picked it up, puzzled at first by its weight. The light almost empty, but not quite. I glanced at the name printed on the label and felt the air leave my lungs. It was addressed to my sister. My sister had been dead for almost 2 years. She had died in winter, suddenly and without warning, a cold absence that still echoed through the walls of my home. I stared at the label, tracing the letters with my eyes, reading them over and over again, as if doing so might change them. But the name was correct. Her name, my address, and today's date clearly stamped in black ink. I brought the package inside with trembling hands and placed it on the kitchen table. For a while I just stood there, watching it like it might move. My coffee grew cold beside it. I did not want to touch it again. I did not want to open it, and yet I could not look away. I tried to think of any reason this could make sense. Maybe someone had mailed something in her name by mistake. But no one would have done that. Everyone who knew her knew she was gone. There had been a funeral, a closed casket, a stone with her name carved into it that I visited every Sunday. And still there the box sat, waiting. Eventually I gave in to the pressure building inside my chest and sliced the tape open. The flaps unfolded with a sound louder than it should have been. Inside was a small black envelope resting on a single piece of folded white cloth. That was all. I took out the envelope first, careful not to tear it. It was unsealed. Inside was a card, blank except for one sentence written in neat, small script. "I know what you did." My fingers trembled as I set the card down, heart racing so fast I felt lightheaded. I looked around the room as if someone might be watching. The cloth turned out to be a scarf, white, soft, still smelling faintly of her perfume. A scent I had not smelled since the week she died. My throat closed up. I dropped it on the table and stepped away. That scarf had been buried with her. I remembered it clearly. It was wrapped around her neck in the casket. I sat on the floor, arms wrapped around my knees, trying to breathe. I told myself I had imagined it. Maybe it was just a copy. But I knew every thread of that scarf. I had helped pick it out the year before she died. She had worn it constantly, and then it had vanished with her body into the ground. After a long time, I stood and repacked the box. I carried it to the back room and locked it in the closet. I did not want to see it again. That night, I barely slept. Every noise felt amplified. The wind at the window, the creak of the pipes. I kept the hallway light on and stayed under the covers, eyes wide. The next day, I checked the return address. It was fake. A set of numbers and letters that led nowhere. I called the delivery company. They confirmed the package had been processed and sent out the day before, but the sender information was registered as private. That was all they could tell me. I tried to forget about it. I kept telling myself it was a cruel prank. Someone from the past trying to stir pain for their own reasons. Maybe someone who had known her. Maybe someone who had resented her. But even that did not explain how the scarf had come back. A week passed, then another. I began to feel normal again. The package stayed hidden in the closet, and I kept the key around my neck at all times. I did not speak of it to anyone, not the neighbors, not my friends. Some things are too strange to say aloud. Then a second package arrived. This time it was smaller. A padded envelope, again addressed to her, again marked with today's date. I felt sick just looking at it. I brought it inside and left it unopened on the counter for hours. I walked past it again and again, each time feeling more pressure behind my eyes. Eventually I opened it. Inside was a photograph. It showed a field, empty but familiar. I had stood in that field before. It was near the woods behind the old family home, the one where she and I had grown up. In the center of the field, barely visible, was a figure in the distance, a little blurry but shaped like her. On the back of the photo was another note. "You left her there." My stomach turned. I had not been to that place in years. I had moved away, buried the memories under layers of routine and time. But I could not deny what the note suggested. I remembered the day clearly. She had wanted to walk through the woods that afternoon. I had followed reluctantly. We argued about something meaningless. I turned away. I left her there in the clearing to sulk, thinking she would follow. But she never came back. When they found her body days later, they ruled it an accident. I never told anyone about the fight. I never told anyone that I had walked away from her that day. I had kept that shame buried deep inside, locked away where even I did not look. But now someone knew. Someone was sending pieces of that moment back to me. Someone wanted me to remember. I went back to the field. The grass was taller now, the trees older. The air was thick and quiet. I stood in the center and closed my eyes, listening for something. A sound, a voice, a sign. Nothing came. Just the wind and the rustle of leaves. I dropped